let's talk about Tanzania. So how did we come to partner with this? Like, we're a little church in Dunn, Virginia. How are we partnered with someone at another school all the way across the globe? And the answer is Dr. Henry Ziegler and his nurse wife, Priscilla. They were members here at least a decade ago, and they used to be medical missionaries in Tanzania. They were in Dar es Salaam at a little health center that was there. And when they came back, Henry was continuing to work with the school, or not, I'm sorry, not the school, the health center. And he was actually actively raising funds to build a hospital that was close to the health center, because as it was, women were having to like cross town. It wasn't really crossing town. Think Tyson's in rush hour traffic around Christmas. You know, it's trying to go from the mall to like the other end of Vienna. That's what's like all the time there. And so he was trying to build a hospital, fund a hospital, so that women wouldn't have to travel as far. People who needed surgery wouldn't have to travel as far. They could get care closer to home. So he actually led a mission trip over and took several Holy Cross parishioners at the time. And they went, and I think they did a roof on the health center. They were painting, they were doing all kinds of handiwork around the health center. And in the midst of that, as you think about the campus, there was the health center, and then next to the health center was this Anglican school. And Penny Cardis and her son Alex went on this mission trip, and Penny loves children. If you know Penny, she loves children. And so the joyful noise from the school clearly drew Penny over that way. And they started having conversations with the kids and then the headmistress. And they learned in the midst of all of this that the school was actually going to get shut down at that time because the government came in and said they didn't have enough bathrooms. And so they were disturbed by this. Like, they learned a lot about the school, and we'll go over some of that in a minute. And they felt like a school that's going to offer a marvelous opportunity should not be closed down because they needed, and it was an obscenely small amount of money, like maybe $1,000 to build this bathroom that has, you know, 4 or 5 stalls on either side. So Holy Cross came back, we raised the money, sent it over, and the bathrooms were built, and the school went on to teach for another day. As a tribute to us, they put Western bathrooms in both the boys and the girls on either side. So my old knees, when we went, greatly appreciated that, because, you know, squatty potties, my knees not being what they used to be, greatly benefited from that. So that's how we sort of came to know the school. But let's back up and talk a little bit about Tanzania. So, like, this is where it is. When they talked about leading another trip over, another mission trip with youth to Tanzania, I'm embarrassed to say that my geography, like, I knew Africa, but I couldn't have looked at a map and told you where it is. So it is sub-Saharan Africa on the eastern side. Dar es Salaam is where the school is located. It is called, Dar es Salaam stands for Abode of Peace. It's the largest city in Tanzania. It's estimated between 5.5 and 7.5 million people. It's a deeply religious country, interestingly. It's half Muslim, half Christian. And it was the original capital. In the early 70s, they decided to move the capital to Dodoma, which is, you know, a little more inland, about 3 hours, depending on checkpoints, from Dar es Salaam. But most of the people in Dar es Salaam kind of rebelled and said, yeah, we're not going. And they didn't. And so most of the government stuff is still actually located in Dar es Salaam. It is a very important port city for all of Africa. And so that's also part of the reason I think most of the people didn't want to go. So much commerce comes in through there that they wanted to keep it in the port city. So this is Dar es Salaam. It looks very modern, right? Like skyscrapers, the roads look lovely. And that is Dar es Salaam. That is part of Dar es Salaam. And also, this is Dar es Salaam. It's beautiful, right? And so in many ways, it feels very idyllic. And these last 2 pictures are essentially what the government tries to put forward as this is what Dar es Salaam is. And it is, but it's also this. All right, so much of the housing sprung up in Dar es Salaam. It's a city without basic infrastructure. There was no civil engineering that really went into most of Dar es Salaam. The nice part that we just saw clearly had civil engineering going on, but here not so much. So it's a combination of mixed settlements and informal settlements. Mixed settlements are the ones that actually got permits, like someone actually bought the land, built the homes, and then others just like, this is a nice spot. Here's where I'm gonna live. I'm going to build my house here. They don't own the land. They have no rights to the land. And so that happens a lot because it's incredibly expensive to buy land. So this is often how it looks. Things very congested, little tiny rows in between the houses. Generally, they don't have a lot of, sometimes it's a dirt floor, sometimes a cement floor. To picture the buildings that often get built, if you think of like the post-World War II tract homes, that kind of little bungalow size house is what gets built. There's generally a hallway down the middle and usually 6 rooms. And a different family will rent each room. So you can have 40 people living in that. And they just sort of sleep, you know, on top of each other, right next to each other. There's no beds. There's not a lot of privacy. A lot of times those don't even have doors. They will have just kind of a shower curtain that kind of opens and closes. So sanitation is terrible. There is no electricity. They're not wired for electricity. If you're lucky enough to have it, you have to pay in advance for it. And so if you're in a house with 6 other families, how do you decide like you don't get power to just one room? They're not that sophisticated, right? They don't have that kind of engineering in it. So you prepay, and when it runs out, it just runs out. So a lot of them don't have it. There are no kitchens in many of them. They cook outside on open pits. So one of the biggest problems is toddlers. They don't have a ton of supervision. The toddlers will wander around and they fall into the fires where people are cooking. So a lot of burns are treated there because of that. No bathrooms. It's usually an outhouse built somewhere. And then generally there's a station, and I'll show you in a minute, where they can go, like a central place to go get water. So when it rains, because roads aren't paved and these are all just informal, it's a muddy, muddy mess. Driving through this is this, right? Like it's whiplash going through. So all that is to say, like, life is kind of hard. Over here you see like things hanging. This one is actually a picture, like these are the markets, like as you go by, people will have little stores. That's where you're gonna go buy your stuff. Open air markets a lot for produce and food and that kind of thing. So these are the challenges I've already said, many of them: poor sanitation, no running water, overcrowding, no sewages, cooking's done outdoor, prepay electricity, and there's little intentional, thoughtful design of anything. So, you know, people sit, and it's hot, right? It gets really hot and rainy and muddy over there during, well, not the last few years, we're in drought, but. So this is kind of a picture of like the central areas where you can go get water. You're gonna carry that container with you. You know, they aren't many. So if you are lucky to have one of these homes right around it, yay for you, but most people don't. And so you're carrying those heavy buckets everywhere. And children help, everybody works, like everybody kind of has to work and carry their weight over there. Challenges. So some of the challenges in living in Dar es Salaam right now is drought. They're in the midst of one of the worst droughts they've had in decades. Livestock is dying, crops they're just, things are withering. They can't grow anything. And when rain is coming, it's not coming when they need it. And so when you don't plant in December and the rains come in December, it does you no good. And if it's too early and it drowns them. So the weather is a problem. Tanzania is really bearing the brunt of climate change. And I think right now their struggle is, okay, the typical growing season we used to see no longer appears to exist. So when are we getting rains? When should we plant? And what's our plan gonna be? And they don't know. They don't know. And so it's a struggle. So the cost of food has skyrocketed. Alice, the headmistress at the school, told me right now there's a sugar shortage. So sugar is incredibly hard to come by. A 1 pound bag of rice that we buy at the store is now like $6. If you wanted to buy a box of pasta, it's like $9. And so food is terribly expensive. Many are eating only ugali at this point. And ugali is like a corn flour kind of thing that gets sort of mixed up a little bit. And it's like either boiled in water, or if you're lucky enough, milk to give a little more nutrients. But that's kind of how people are surviving on right now, because they can't afford a lot. They will try to have rice once a day, but it's becoming less and less. And to that end, like, things were bad before. Things were bad back in 2013, the first time we put boots on the ground there, and children in their morning assembly were passing out from hunger. And that's how we learned about the problems with malnutrition there. And those look like the golden age now, frankly. Like, I think people look back at that fondly and wish that they had conditions that were like that, versus where they are now. So, because then they at least had rice. We're now down to ugali. Like, imagine going home and mixing up some flour and boiling it, and that's it for today. I think most of us in this room probably had breakfast. If we didn't have breakfast, we know that as soon as we're done here, we're going to go get something for lunch, right? And most of us know that we're going to have a dinner. We may not know what it is yet because we haven't gone to Giant, but we know we're having it. That is not the experience of our brothers and sisters in Tanzania right now. Yes.
Well, Cheryl, I know we've been experiencing a lot of the inflation here in America. What is that inflation like in Tanzania?
It's much higher. So, a bag of rice, I think when we were there, a bag of rice, I went to the grocery store, because I love going to grocery stores in other countries, and an African one was just my dream. So it was, 50 cents. It's now $6, right? Like, in 10 years, it's now $6. So that's a problem, because the average wages for a year is about $1,000. And that's not the families near our school. That's the educated people. That's the architects. That's the physicians. That's not, I don't really have an education and I'm just trying to scrape by painting houses kind of guy. So again, it's expensive and food is terrible. So also when we started, and Maude, correct me if you remember, I think it was like $21 maybe to feed them for a year.
Yeah.
And we're up to 36. So unemployment is a huge problem. Like I was just alluding to, the government wants to say it's 9%. First of all, there's no real way to go out and capture this data. Additionally, lots of people, like here, when you just drop out of the workforce, you're not getting captured, right? So sometimes it may say our unemployment's 4%, but maybe it's really 9% because people just gave up looking. So by all reports by people on the ground, it is actually much higher than 9%. Alice says there is some hope. The government is sort of putting money into these cooperatives so people could get loans to start businesses, which feels great, but people need money to consume whatever it is your business is going to offer to the world. So I don't know how far down they're going to get. I don't know how many of these businesses are actually going to be successful at this point, but they're feeling hopeful. And I'm certainly not going to be the one to take the hope away because they need all the hope they can get. Any job is hard to find. So here's an example. Universities are graduating about 150,000 teachers a year. The last time the government recruited teachers was like 10 years ago, and they only took 15,000. So you can even go to university and get a degree. It's not going to guarantee you a job. And so that also becomes a problem, because then how do you pick what you're going to go into so that you can actually find a job, is a struggle. Corruption is rampant everywhere, even within, sadly, the Anglican Church. So a lot of times people have asked me, like, they'll look at the annual report and we'll see money sitting in the Tanzania Porridge. Like, why does it sit there? Why don't we just send it off? The answer is we can't. If we send it all, it's going to send up red flags all over the place. And that money won't actually make it to the children and into the children's bellies. So we directly wire the money to Alice, who sends us receipts, and is sending us ledger, reports so that we see where the money is going. But if we didn't, then in all likelihood, the church would take it. And that was really eye-opening for me, because that's not how I think of the church. That's not how I wanted to think about the church. And it's certainly not what I wanted to feel when I was forced to have lunch with the bishop while we were there. Because how do you take the money from these starving children? Right? So, government, it's happening in the governments, the police, it's happening. When we first got there, Penny and I hopped in the car with our driver Annie to go grocery store. It was supposed to be 15 minutes away. We leave Maud there with Jack and Brianna, and we're like, okay, we'll see you. We're gonna go get some yogurt, some water. It'll be great. We'll see you soon. And we were gone for about 2.5 hours. We didn't have the cell phone over there, so Maud had no way of reaching us. She didn't know what happened. We'd been in country an hour when we took off. And what happened is we got to a traffic circle, and we were way back in the traffic circle, but somehow the police were directing. Even though there was a light, the police were directing. And the police decided, for whatever reason, that our side of the rotary was not going to move for more than an hour. And there was no reason why. We couldn't understand it. And then suddenly, magically, we were able to go. And Anania told us that in that situation is because someone finally got fed up with waiting. They pulled their money and paid the officer to allow our side to go. So that's every day, right? Traffic's bad here, but the light will change eventually and we can go. The police aren't there waiting for a bribe for us to be able to go further. So it's incredibly difficult. You have to be able to grease the palms of lots of people in order to get something that is even for the benefit of the Tanzanian people going forward. Yes.
One of the best ways I found to hide money was put it in your socks.
Yeah, that's
And
fair
nobody
point.
even thinks about that.
Yeah, fair point.
We're gonna ask you to take a shoe.
Yeah, fair point. Yes.
We send, when you request us to send money, we have a set profile at the bank that sends the money automatically down. And we have never had any problems since we've established that. And it is in fact protected that it only goes to her, period. And
Yeah.
so you don't have to worry about the money that we collect going to the bishop or places that shouldn't go. It
Right.
has never been a problem since we
No.
established that, and we've been doing it now.
For 10 years.
over
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So other challenges, transportation. So these little buses are called dala-dalas. The motorcycle are called picky-pickies. And this is how most Tanzanians get around. And when I tell you on these little things that there's 250 people packed in there are 250 people packed in there. You are just on top of people as you travel around. And so if you find a job, you better hope you live near it, because if you live in Vienna and are gonna commute the distance to DC, you're gonna be 4 to 5 hours a day, at least traveling, because you also don't know when the police are gonna shut down your lane of traffic. So that also becomes a problem in terms of people seeking employment and trying to get around from place to place. Lots of people walk. A lot of people just walk. So the annual wages are about a little over $1,000 a year. Rent has to be paid, 6 to 12 for 6 to 12 month blocks. You're not month to month over there. You prepay the electricity. Government schools, people often ask, well, aren't there schools? Yes, there are schools. But the government schools have a student teacher ratio of 250 to 1. And for a long time, this recently changed. Secondary schools and university were all taught in English. However, all of the government schools were taught in Kiswahili. So how do you, if you only learn Kiswahili, how do you ever then even go to a secondary school, let alone university, if you don't know English? So the government actually has started, Alice told me, doing government English schools, and they're cheaper. They're about $120 a year. The rate for Alice's school is almost 500 a year. So certainly government would be the cheaper way to go. But again, the student teacher ratios are 150 to 200 to 1. I don't really know many kindergartners that could learn in that environment. My daughter can. And she certainly couldn't do it if she was hungry. So they continue, so the families that show up at St. Augustine's really feel like they understand that the key to their children's economic success in life is going to be an education. So they are willing to go here. Most private schools are much more expensive, even more than the annual wage. So that's out of reach. But St. Augustine's is sort of within reach. So they do all that they can to scrape together the money to send them. But then that also means that there isn't money for food. There's not money for electricity. There's not money for a lot of things, right? They're the families that are going to be eating the ugali. And so they're making this enormous sacrifice in the name of their children, as we all do, because we all want better for our children. But what we know here in the US is children can't learn when they're hungry. So it almost feels like they're doing all of this for naught, because kids do pass out during morning assembly because they're hungry. So when we saw this, right, we felt like we have to do something. Now, fortunately, someone else had been to the school and felt the exact same way. So I inherited this program from a nurse who had been in Dar es Salaam, had also been at the health center. She had done sort of longitudinal studies every January. Their school year is January to December, unlike our September to May, June kind of thing. Every child gets measured and weighed, and they keep longitudinal data on the children. And it's based on those markers, much like our pediatricians do with our kids, like this is where you are on the chart. They take the 315 most malnourished children to be in the program. So it sucks if you're 316, but if you make it from 1 to 315, you're golden because you at least get one meal. And so this public health nurse had sort of worked with the school on this porridge recipe to kind of, and then kept studies, like kept data like month to month and watched to see if the children could actually come out or at least improve, and they did. So that is the recipe we continue to use.
What is in the recipe?
There's milk, there's flour. I don't have it off the top of my
I just
head.
think about, all the meal pattern requirements we have in this country, their protein, is their vegetable.
Yeah, so the protein will largely come from the milk that gets used. So they are still using milk. So they get it with that. The grain that's in it, I'm not sure. So there is some protein. There's no vegetables in it. But it's a porridge essentially. So they are getting that. It is helping. And they also get these two little, they call them bites. They look like donut holes. But there's like a little sweet, so that kind of goes with it. So it's a little extra treat for them. But Angela, the nurse in the UK, was 74. So she's 84, 85 now. And was ready to kind of like be done with this because she wanted to retire, but also felt like I can't leave these children starving. So when I heard about it, I said, yes, go ahead, I'll take it. As I said in a meeting recently, I went to the region meeting, I said, I kind of just said yes and took it. You know, I kind of didn't ask permission, like it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So I said, guess what we're gonna do? And mercifully, Wes was our pastor at the time. We said, yes, we're gonna go ahead and do that. So that's how we came to have it, is I took it over from Angela, and then Holy Cross started feeding the kids. The current enrollment is 871. They go from pre-K up through, they call it level 7, which is kind of 7th grade. 36% of the students are enrolled in the Porridge program. And as I said before, many students only eat one meal a day. And this is their meal. And you know, what was really powerful when we went is that you know, the first mission trip we took over the youth, we took computers and a printer and soccer balls and all kinds of stuff, like PE kinds of stuff. And the kids were happy about that. We took a camera. They love having their picture taken. They loved that. But Alice announced that on the last day, before we left to go get on our plane, we were feeding the entire school lunch. And the cheers that erupted from those children haunts me to this day. Because I understood in that moment what that meant. And I quietly put my sunglasses down over my eyes and excused myself into a classroom and cried for the next 20 minutes. Because I understood what it meant to them. And I was sad we couldn't feed them every day we were there. But it really brought it home. And I think it did for our kids as well that were there.
Can I interject a little bit?
Sure.
So there's no refrigeration.
Mhm.
So there's no school provided lunch for people, even if they could afford it. So the families that can afford to send lunch with their children to school, and the families that cannot afford it, their children just sit by while the other children eat.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. They just play in the
Dirt.
out in front while the kids that can afford to eat. And that's another one of like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Aside from Americans, what other countries are involved doing the same thing that Americans are doing?
So at the school, it's primarily Americans. So now we just have some joy because there's a lot of heaviness that we've just talked about. These kids loved our kids so much. Brianna felt like a rock star. Jack would bring out his guitar and they would just swarm them. It was really beautiful. I think that sort of exchange between our teens and these kids was really fantastic. They loved having American teenagers over there. And they asked really fascinating questions. Like they really thought our streets were lined with gold. Brianna was just like, well, what do your streets look like? She's like, they look like your streets. And they thought that was a lie. They thought that really we just had gold lined streets. So it was great in that they could share what actually American life is like with these kids. So challenges. So like a simple repair bureau can shut things down, right? Like we talked at the beginning about the bathroom was going to close the school down. This was the stove. And last year it was gonna cost $400 to fix it. And it was literally crumbling. And there's no fund for that. There's no emergency fund. There's no credit card to put that on. It was really just going to be the end of the program if it didn't get fixed. Fortunately, Holy Cross sent funds to fix the stove. So this is what it looked like before. So if you look at the bottom, the little holes in the bottom are actually where the wood goes. You push it far to the back and then that's where you'll light a fire and then it'll heat to cook. Those two beams in the back actually now vent to the roof. They actually did put little silos up there so we could vent the smoke out versus it was going into the hospital next door. Which was really great for their asthmatic patients. So now we've taken care of that problem with the repair. So that was the before. And this is the after. So like it got completely demolished, built anew, and it's working beautifully and they're so grateful for it. So that was also incredibly, that was money very well spent. So, in summary, the challenges are numerous, but we really can make a difference. I don't know about all of you, but I turn on the news every day and there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of heartache. And I don't know how to stop wars. I don't know how to influence policy decisions anywhere. I don't know how to stop killing and maiming and suffering. I can't do any of that. I can do this. I can feed 2 or 3 of these kids. for a year. And that makes an enormous difference in their lives. When we were there the first time, Brianna fell in with a little boy named Norman. Norman had a physical disability. He was using crutches. I don't know what was wrong, but he was using crutches. And what we would see when we would go to the markets where people with disabilities were languishing in the street, because as I said, in Tanzania, everybody works. Everybody pulls their weight. And if you aren't, then even if your family loves you, if they get sick, they die, you're out on the street. Brianna was heartbroken at the idea of what this child's future was going to look like. And she asked to meet with headmistress, and so she did. And I watched my little 16-year-old sit across from this woman, like a boss, I might add, asking questions like, how much does it cost to go here? And how do people afford that? And what happens if the kids don't pay their tuition? What happens to them? And went through all of it. She asked about Norman. She asked if he was a good student, because Norman had told her that when he grew up, he wanted to be a scientist. And he had all these magnificent dreams for himself and for his future. And Brianna understood that if he didn't finish his education, none of that was going to be possible. So Brianna turned to me and said, Mom, if we pay Norman's school tuition, I will forego school clothes this year and next year, if that's what it takes. Can we just finish paying for his education here? And I like, yes, we can still get you school clothes, but I mean, I wasn't gonna say that to her in the moment, but I was like, yes, absolutely. And so we did that. And Norman's dad was in India getting a graduate degree. So he had left his family with his mom to raise the kids. Grandma was struggling, you know, to make ends meet. He didn't have extra money to send back because he was really just trying to get his education so he could come back and provide better for his family. And so in that moment, we provided a hand up for him and his family. And so the next time that we went, he had graduated, he'd come back to Tanzania, he'd gotten a job with the government and was doing very well. He had Brianna and I over, and they had this feast for us as a way of thanking her, or thanking us. With the advent of social media, Norman is on social media, and he reached out to Brianna not that long ago to thank her for what she did for him. Because I made sure every time his dad thanked me, I said it wasn't me that did this, it was Brianna that wanted to do this. So this is her doing. I wasn't going to steal that thunder from her. So Norman reached out to thank her. And he is in university and he's doing well, and he actually has a bright future. And that cost, I don't know, while he was there, it was like $200 or $300 a year. It was truly nothing, but we've given him a future. And so that will help all of his descendants, right? Like the more education, the more that, you know, sprinkles down, like it improves the quality of education for generations to come, or the quality of life for generations to come. So us feeding them has that exact same effect. So I hope that you'll consider in your Lenten discipline giving up your Starbucks for a few weeks now through Easter. Easily between now through Easter, you can spend $36 with just a few visits. So I hope you'll consider continuing to support the program.